Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a great pleasure to follow on from the Chairman of the All-Party Group for Perpetrators, and I'm sure her work is extraordinarily important. I also follow on from the speech a little bit earlier from the Mother of the House, who was talking about my constituent, Natalie Connolly. Natalie Connolly, as she so rightly said, would be 28 years old now. She has a young daughter, and she comes from a family of loving parents, loving grandparents, loving sister, and of course a loving daughter. Natalie Connolly fell into a relationship with John Broadhurst in 2016 and was, I guess, impressed with him. I don't know. He was a millionaire. She comes from a relatively normal background. One Saturday afternoon, they went off for a rather extensive party, I guess. And that evening, they went home. They were driven home by his driver, went back to their house where they were renting it while their main house had been renovated, and indulged in intimate activities of an aggressive nature that was allegedly consensual, I believe was consensual. When John Broadhurst went to bed that night, he stepped over the bleeding, unconscious body of Natalie Connolly on the steps of their house and went upstairs, leaving her. He came down the next morning, stepped across her now lifeless body, went and had breakfast, washed the car, and then called the emergency services, telling the police that, and the paramedics that she was as dead as a donut, which seemed extraordinary. Obviously, Broadhurst was charged with murder, and the trial happened at the end of last year, and it was, at the time, quite a high-profile trial. He was obviously charged with murder, and the Crown Prosecution Service were going to maintain a murder case. The injuries that she suffered were unbelievably extensive. They were extraordinarily intimate, and they were, frankly, utterly brutal. And Natalie had lost a lot of blood from these injuries. But the problem was, and this is where the law comes into this, she bled into a carpet, so it was impossible to measure the extent of her blood loss, and as a result of which, they couldn't absolutely confirm that she died as a direct result of the injuries or of overuse of alcohol and possibly narcotics. So the charges were dropped from murder to manslaughter by neglect, by the fact that he had left her behind to bleed to death overnight. The problem was that in order to get this change of the charge, you have to sit down and talk to the family. I met the family, and they are an immensely kind, loving group of people. I sat down with them and had a conversation with them about their daughter, who had been besmirched by this vile man. Their last memories of her will be of the court case discussing what he is alleging about her and her hideous, unbelievable injuries. And I sat with this family looking at a group of people whose memories of her as a child should be of buying her first Snow White costume, buying a Barbie doll, all of that kind of stuff that we want to do as we are parents, loving our families. And it put their family in an intolerable position, being asked to understand the risk balances of complicated legal issues. And they had to work out what the right way forward was to get a prosecution. Madam Deputy Speaker, one of the unbelievably brilliant things about this House is that we aren't divided, actually, when it comes to this sort of thing. And when this case happened, the Right Honourable Learned Member, the Mother of the House, approached me, reached out to me before Christmas, saying, "Are you aware of this?" And the two of us worked together. I'm not a lawyer, I don't understand this particularly, but she does, and this illustrates how good we can be as a House. We went and visited the Attorney General to see if we could have a retrial, and he said, actually, no, in this particular case, it was right because of the reduction of the charge. So, together, actually me being led by her and learning from her, we want to put forward a couple of amendments, one of which is... Yes, please.
My honourable friend is making an incredibly important point, and I do think it's imperative that he is allowed the time in which he might achieve that.
Thank you. Very grateful. There are two points. The first is, it cannot possibly be a defence that she was asking for it, that somebody dies. You cannot do that. Apart from anything else, the individual has not got the ability to defend themselves, and their reputation is being destroyed in front of the people they love and in front of the people who care for them and their friends. That is absolutely wrong, so we cannot have the 50 Shades of Grey defence being allowed. The second point is when the victims' families are asked to make that decision about changing the charge so that you can get a better chance of a conviction coming through, they're not qualified to do it. We need people who are brilliantly clever at this. We need brilliant barristers, brave to go and fight these cases on the behalf of the victims. But what we can do is we can make sure that somebody who really understands this can make the decision. So in the event of this type of injury and homicide, under a domestic abuse setting, that the Director of Public Prosecutions is the one that is consulted if a change is going to be made. And that way, those families get the support. Natalie Connolly, as I say, would be 28 now, with her young daughter growing up in this warm family. And she is no longer with us. Madam Deputy Speaker, if there's any way that we can remember her, we have to do something to make sure this can never happen to anybody ever again.